I never thought I'd be the one going through my father's belongings. At 42 years old, I always imagined he'd outlive us all. Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison was the kind of man who seemed indestructible. A Marine who'd served 3 tours overseas, survived countless operations, and came home with nothing more than a limp and a collection of medals he kept hidden in a shoebox. But heart attacks don't care about your military record, and on a cold March morning in Portland, Oregon, my father collapsed in his garage and never got back up. My name is David Harrison, and I'm standing in my childhood home, surrounded by boxes and memories I'm not ready to face. The rain hammers against the windows, typical Pacific Northwest weather, and the house feels impossibly empty without my father's presence filling it. My wife Sarah is downstairs making coffee, giving me space to sort through Dad's personal effects. My hands shake slightly as I open his old military footlocker, the green paint chipped and faded from decades of storage. Inside, I find what you'd expect. His dress uniform, perfectly pressed despite the years, photographs of his unit, a bronze star he never mentioned, and beneath it all, a leather-bound journal I've never seen before. The cover is worn smooth, the edges frayed, and when I open it, I recognize my father's precise handwriting immediately. The first entry is dated August 15th, 2004, 21 years ago, during his second deployment to Iraq. My father wasn't a man who talked about his service. Growing up, I learned not to ask questions about the war. The few times I tried, he'd change the subject or simply walk away. My mother once told me that some things were too heavy to share, that Dad carried burdens he didn't want to pass on to his family. I respected that silence. Even as it created a distance between us, I never quite knew how to bridge. But here, in my hands, is something different. The journal falls open to a page marked with a faded photograph of 4 Marines in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera despite the dust and exhaustion visible on their faces. I recognize my father immediately. Younger, harder, his eyes holding something I never saw in civilian life. The other 3 men are strangers to me, but written on the back of the photo in Dad's handwriting are 4 names: Michael Harrison, James Rodriguez, Thomas Chen, Marcus Webb, Firebase Phantom, Al-Anbar Province, brothers. I sit down on the edge of his bed, the journal heavy in my lap, and begin to read. The early entries are routine, descriptions of daily life on the firebase, complaints about the heat, observations about the landscape. My father's voice comes through clearly, more open and vulnerable than I ever knew him to be. He writes about missing my mother, about wondering what I was doing back home. I would have been 21 then, finishing college, oblivious to the reality of his world. Then I reach an entry dated September 3rd, 2004, and everything changes. The handwriting becomes more urgent, less controlled, and the first line makes my blood run cold. I don't know how to write about what happened last night. I don't know if I ever can. But Rodriguez said we need to document this, that we need to remember, even if we never share it with anyone. So here it is. Here's the truth we'll carry for the rest of our lives. My father's words pull me into a world I've only seen in movies and news reports. But this is different. This is real. This is his truth. The mission seems straightforward, he writes. Intelligence reported an enemy cache in a compound about 12 clicks north of our position. 4 of us, Rodriguez, Chen, Webb, and myself, were tasked with reconnaissance. We'd done dozens of these missions. We knew the terrain, knew the protocols, knew each other well enough to communicate with hand signals in the dark. We thought we knew what we were doing. We left the firebase at 2100 hours, moving through the darkness with night vision equipment that turned the desert into shades of green and shadow. The temperature had dropped to maybe 60 degrees, cold by desert standards, and the wind carried sand that got into everything. Chen took point because he had the best instincts. Rodriguez covered our 6. Webb and I moved in the middle, weapons ready, every sense on high alert. The compound appeared exactly where intelligence said it would be, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall, about 2 kilometers from the nearest village. We observed it for an hour, watching for movement, for any sign of enemy activity. Nothing. The place looked abandoned. Rodriguez wanted to call it in and return to base, but our orders were to confirm the cache before extraction. I pause reading, my throat tight. I've heard these stories before in sanitized versions. We conducted reconnaissance operations, Dad would say if pressed, but this is different. This is the texture of fear, the weight of decisions made in darkness. We moved in at 2330 hours. The entry continues. Chen and I approached the main building while Rodriguez and Webb secured the perimeter. The door was unlocked. which should have been our first warning. Inside, we found them. Not weapons, not an enemy cache, but people, civilians. A family. There were 7 of them huddled in the main room. An older man, a woman I assumed was his wife, 3 children ranging from maybe 5 to 12 years old, and 2 younger adults who might have been their children. They were terrified when we entered, the children crying, the adults trying to shield them with their bodies. The older man spoke rapidly in Arabic, gesturing at us, at the door, at something we couldn't understand. Chen, who had some Arabic from his time as a translator, tried to communicate. The old man kept repeating something, pointing urgently at the floor. That's when we saw it. The entire building was wired with explosives, professional work, military-grade materials, pressure triggers set throughout the compound. Someone had turned this family's home into a trap, and we'd walked right into it. My hands are shaking as I turn the page. Outside, the Portland rain continues its steady rhythm, but I'm no longer here. I'm in that compound with my father, feeling the terror of that moment. We had maybe 10 minutes before our scheduled check-in, Dad writes. If we didn't report back, Firebase Phantom would send reinforcements straight into the same trap. But the family, Jesus, the family. The old man was still talking, and Chen finally understood. The insurgents had come 3 days earlier, planted the explosives, and told the family that if they left or warned anyone, they'd kill everyone in their village. They were hostages in their own home, waiting for American soldiers to trigger the devices and die. Rodriguez wanted to evacuate immediately, call in EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Let the experts handle it. But the nearest EOD team was 40 minutes out, and the triggers were too sophisticated. Any wrong move, any attempt to leave, and the whole place would blow. We'd all die, including the family. And worse, the explosion would draw in reinforcements from the firebase, turning a single tragedy into a massacre. I've never felt fear like that. Pure animal terror that made my hands shake and my breath come in gasps. But Webb, God bless Marcus Webb, Webb had worked construction before enlisting. He'd seen demolition work, understood blast patterns and trigger mechanisms. He looked at me with those steady eyes of his and said, "I think I can disarm this, Gunny, but I need time and absolute silence." The next pages of the journal are difficult to read. My father's handwriting becomes increasingly erratic, matching the chaos of that night. I can feel his anguish bleeding through the ink. We had a choice to make, he writes, and we had to make it fast. Protocol said, evacuate, call for backup, let trained specialists handle the situation. But protocol didn't account for 7 innocent people who would die if we left. Protocol didn't account for the fact that by the time help arrived, the insurgents might detonate the explosives remotely. Protocol didn't account for the weight of looking into a child's terrified eyes and choosing to save your own skin. Rodriguez argued for evacuation. He was right technically. He was following orders, thinking tactically, trying to save his team. But Chen looked at those kids and said he couldn't leave them. And I thought about my own son back home, about David growing up without a father because I'd followed protocol instead of doing what was right. I thought about living the rest of my life knowing I'd abandoned 7 people to save myself. So we made the call. Webb would attempt to disarm the devices. Rodriguez would maintain our perimeter and handle communication with base. Chen and I would keep the family calm and assist Webb as needed. We had 20 minutes before our scheduled check-in, which meant we had maybe 15 minutes to work with before command started asking questions we couldn't answer. I have to stop reading to wipe my eyes. My father, the man who spent my entire childhood maintaining rigid control over his emotions, had poured all his fear and doubt onto these pages. For the first time, I'm seeing the human being beneath the Marine, the father beneath the soldier. Webb worked like a surgeon, the journal continues, his hands steady despite the pressure, despite the sweat running down his face in the cold desert night. He identified 3 primary devices and 7 secondary triggers, each one capable of bringing down the entire structure. The family watched in silence, the mother holding her youngest child so tightly I thought she might hurt him. The old man kept his eyes on me, and I saw something in his expression I'll never forget. Not just fear, but a desperate hope that these American soldiers, these invaders, might somehow save his family. Rodriguez called in our check-in, reported all clear, bought us more time, but I could hear the strain in his voice. Every second we stayed increased the risk. Every moment we spent in that compound was a violation of orders, a gamble with our lives and potentially the lives of everyone at Firebase Phantom. Webb disarmed the first device at 23:48 hours, the second at 23:54. He was moving faster now, more confident, but also more exhausted. His hands started to shake around the third device, the main trigger, the one connected to enough C4 to vaporize the entire compound. Chen and I watched helplessly, our weapons useless, our training meaningless in that moment. Everything depended on Webb's steady hands and his construction site memories. At 0003 hours, 3 minutes past our window, Webb cut the final wire. Nothing happened. The building didn't explode. We didn't die. The family didn't die. For a moment, none of us moved, afraid that any motion would somehow trigger what Webb had just disarmed. Then the youngest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 5, let out a small laugh, a sound of pure relief that broke the tension like thunder. We evacuated the family to a safe location, documented the explosive devices for intelligence, and returned to Firebase Phantom at 0145 hours. Our commanding officer never asked why we were late on our check-in. Rodriguez never filed a formal report about what really happened. We made a pact that night, the 4 of us. What happened in that compound would stay between us. No medals, no recognition, no official record. Some things, we agreed, were too complicated to explain to people who weren't there. The final section of my father's journal entry is dated several months later, January 2005. By then he was back at Firebase Phantom, his tour continuing, but something fundamental had changed. I think about that night constantly, he writes. Not with pride. I'm not sure we did the right thing even though it worked out. We violated protocol, put ourselves at unnecessary risk, could have compromised our entire unit. But I also think about that little girl's laugh, about the old man who grabbed my hand before we left and said something in Arabic that Chen translated as, "God sees your heart." I think about what it means to be a soldier, to follow orders, but also to be a human being who has to live with his choices. Webb says he doesn't regret it. Rodriguez says he has nightmares about what could have happened. Chen says it was the only decision we could have made. I don't know what I think. I just know that when I look at photos of David, when I think about going home to my family, I'm glad I'm the kind of man who stayed in that compound. I'm glad I'm the kind of father who chose to save those children, even if it was stupid, even if it was reckless, even if it violated every protocol I'd been trained to follow. We never saw the family again, never learned their names, never knew what happened to them after we left. But sometimes I imagine them, imagine those children growing up, going to school, living lives they wouldn't have had if we'd followed orders. Sometimes I imagine my own son learning about this someday, understanding that his father wasn't perfect, wasn't always by the book, but tried his best to do what was right in an impossible situation. I'm writing this down because Rodriguez is right. We need to remember, not for glory or recognition, but because this moment defined us. This is who we are, 4 Marines who chose humanity over protocol, who gambled their lives on the hope that they could save innocent people. Whether that makes us heroes or fools, I'll never know, but it makes us human. And in this war, in this desert hell that feels like something worth holding on to, the entry ends there. I sit in silence, the journal open on my lap, tears streaming down my face. The rain has stopped, and late afternoon sunlight filters through the clouds, painting my father's bedroom in shades of gold. "David?" Sarah's voice comes from the doorway. "Are you okay?" I look up at her. This woman I've built a life with, and realize I'm holding something precious, not just a journal, but a key to understanding the man who raised me. My father's silence wasn't about emotional distance or inability to connect. It was about carrying the weight of choices too complex to explain, about protecting his family from the burden of impossible decisions made in darkness. "I need to find them," I say, my voice rough. The other 3 Marines. "Rodriguez, Chen, and Webb. They're in here. Dad kept track of them after the war. I need to talk to them." Over the next 3 weeks, I tracked them down. James Rodriguez is a high school teacher in San Antonio, Texas. Thomas Chen runs a construction company in Seattle, following in Webb's footsteps, he tells me. Marcus Webb is harder to find, but I eventually locate him working as a counselor at a veterans center in Phoenix, Arizona. I call Rodriguez first. He's silent for a long time after I explain who I am and what I found. "Your father was a good man," he finally says. "The best Marine I ever served with. That night," he pauses, and I can hear the emotion in his voice. "That night showed me what leadership really means. Not blindly following orders, but having the courage to make impossible choices and live with the consequences." Chen tells me about the family. After the war, he went back to Iraq as a civilian contractor and tried to find them. He eventually located the old man. The father had passed away, But his children remembered the American soldiers who saved their lives. 2 of the kids became doctors. 1 became a teacher. The little girl who laughed, she's studying engineering at a university in Baghdad. Your father saved lives that night, Chen says. Not just those 7 people, but everyone they've touched, everyone they've helped. That's his legacy, David. That's what he carried in silence for 21 years. Webb is the one who helps me understand my father's silence. We meet for coffee in Phoenix, and he's exactly how I imagined from Dad's descriptions. Calm, steady, with eyes that have seen things most people never will. Mike never talked about that night because he didn't know how, Webb explains. How do you tell your family that you violated direct orders to save strangers? How do you explain that sometimes the right thing and the military thing aren't the same? Your father loved you too much to burden you with his doubts, David. He wanted you to see him as strong, as certain, as a hero. He didn't want you to know that he was just a man trying to do his best in an impossible situation. I returned to Portland with a fuller understanding of my father. The journal sits on my desk now, a testament to his humanity, his courage, his doubt. I've decided to keep his silence, not because I'm ashamed of what he did, but because I understand now that some stories belong to the people who lived them. The journal is my inheritance, a private window into the man behind the medals, but it's not something the world needs to know. Instead, I focus on continuing his legacy. I volunteer at the local Veterans Center, helping other military families bridge the silence between service and civilian life. I talk to my own children about courage, not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. I teach them that heroes aren't people who never doubt, but people who do the right thing even when they're terrified, even when they're unsure, even when following the rules might be easier. The journal's final page contains one last entry, written just months before my father died. The handwriting is shakier now, the words fewer, but the message is clear. David will find this someday. I hope he understands. I hope he knows that being a good man sometimes means making choices that haunt you. I hope he knows that I loved him enough to carry this weight alone, to protect him from the complicated truth of what it means to serve, to fight, to choose humanity over orders. I hope he finds Rodriguez, Chen, and Webb. I hope they tell him that his father tried his best. That's all any of us can do, try our best and hope it's enough. It was enough, Dad. It was more than enough. As I close the journal for the last time, I understand that my father's silence was never about distance. It was about love. He carried the weight of that night so I wouldn't have to, shouldered the complexity of impossible choices so I could grow up believing in clear rights and wrongs. Now that I know the truth, I realize he was teaching me all along. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is carry your burdens quietly, protecting the people you love from the weight of the world you've seen. The rain starts again outside, typical Portland weather, and I feel at peace. My father never told anyone what happened that night, until I found his journal. And now I understand why some secrets are worth keeping, some silences are worth honoring, and some stories are precious precisely because they're shared only with those who need to hear them.